Welcome to the Inner Space Project podcast, where we explore the full spectrum of emotions, from joy and love to sadness and fear, taking you on an inner space journey that challenges societal norms, encourages open dialogue, and raises awareness about all the parts of us, including the ones that may seem dark and mysterious. I'm your host, Dr. Patti Ashley, psychotherapist, author, TEDx speaker, and clinical trainer. Thank you for joining me as we navigate the labyrinth of emotions, dismantle stigma, and pave the way for a more compassionate and connected world. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Inner Space Project podcast. I'm Dr. Patti Ashley, your host here today, and I'm excited to interview my first guest in this journey on the podcast of the Inner Space Project, and all ways that we can learn more about what's going on in our inner world. And I've divided the segments of this podcast up into beginnings, middles, and endings. And the beginning segments will feature guests who can speak about pregnancy, childbirth, all the things in the early part of life. Middles are people that are going to talk about just the middle of life in general and the journey, and endings will be loss, grief, and transition. But today we start at the beginning with our guest, who's a dear friend of mine who I met years ago in Phoenix, Arizona. And I am thrilled that she can be with us today. She's worked as a pioneer and a champion in the mental health field for over 35 years. Let me say the infant mental health field. She's led efforts to integrate infant mental health awareness and practices into pediatric medical residencies and clinics. She was the first Arizona Healthy Steps specialist. And Healthy Steps is a program that integrates child development into pediatric child care. She's taught pediatric residents on the relationship between brain development and children's behaviors. She served as a national Healthy Steps trainer and trained over 30 pediatric practices in adopting the Healthy Steps approach. She was recruited by a rural Arizona hospital chief medical officer and chief executive officer who shared a vision to build a system of care meeting the pediatric needs of young children and their families. Over a 13-year period, she's implemented Healthy Steps and filled the gaps for children with special needs. She has extensive training with Dr. Bruce Perry, a well-known child and trauma expert, and she is a certified trainer of his early childhood trauma model. There's so much that this woman has done to really speak to the needs of young children and families. She's a founding member of the Postpartum Support International Arizona chapter. She served as a board member for 2 terms, and she was appointed by 4 governors to serve as the chair of the Early Intervention Interagency Coordinating Council. She was the chair of the First Things First State Early Childhood and Health Board's Regional Council. She holds a master's in child development, counseling psychology, and she's a fellow of the UMASS NAPA's Infant Mental Health Postgraduate Fellowship. She's currently living near me in Colorado and is a wife, mother, grandmother, and most recently has become a great grandmother. She's a dear friend of mine, and I am so excited to have her on the show today. And hopefully she will be a frequent guest in our beginning segment, because obviously infant mental health is where we all begin. So welcome, everyone, DeAnn Davies. Hi, DeAnn.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley.
Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. I'm a little tired after hearing that bio, but I have to remember that was over 35 years that I accomplished those tasks and that work.
Yes, I know. And it's a lot. And it's important to be acknowledged for that, because part of the reason I'm doing this podcast is I really want to raise awareness of everything about life that we often don't talk about. And I always thought, you and I met years ago, and we hit it off right away because I had done a parent education program for a pediatric group for 5 years. And I always thought, though, got to start with the babies and the mamas and the daddies. We just got to start because this is, I heard once somebody say children are our greatest natural resource. And so starting early, and we have so much to learn, and so much to learn. Parents have babies and they have this idea that they ought to know what they're doing. So let's start. I have a few questions I want to ask you and get your take on all things about infant mental health. So first, tell us, what exactly is infant mental health? People say, oh, you work in infant mental health. What does an infant need,
Mhm.
health-wise? So what
Well,
exactly is infant mental health?
right. And people visualize an infant laying on a couch and a therapist um,
Right, exactly.
treating them. So listening to their woes, which, would mostly include crying, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that. It's not that for babies and toddlers and preschoolers. So when we say infant, we really mean young children. So we mean, well, we can mean prenatal to age 5 in the infant category. I specifically specialize in infant mental health for children birth to 3 and push it to 5 if we have to, because there's no one else that has that skill set in our area, our service area. So oftentimes I will push it to 5. And so infants do come into the world not as a blank slate, as is still often believed. And that was adopted in the 1700s, right? So
Mm.
we still hang on to those beliefs that we've been told from generations past. Well, thankfully, because of research, we know that infants come into this world knowing quite a bit. And what they do know is that they need a sense of safety. They need to be able to rely on their primary caregivers, so the person that takes care of them the most, to be there emotionally for them. They can't get up and go get what they need. So um, they need to be able to rely on having their needs met. So food and um, just taking care of them and their emotions, helping them regulate their emotions. So if you've ever seen a baby way out of control with crying, some of those babies go from 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. You caregivers know who I'm talking about if you have one of those.
Yeah.
um, they need help when they are out of control like that. They really need help, whether they need you to bring their arms in or tuck them or cuddle them, or some kids don't even want to be cuddled. But whatever it is that calms them and helps them come back down from that out of control cry, you're supporting their mental health right now in the moment and in the future, because you're creating that sense of safety for them. And when babies learn that they are safe in this world, they can then go out and explore this world and become who they want to be.
Yeah, I love that. And, our favorite teacher, who's no longer with us, Dr. T. Barry Brazelton,
Mhm.
said it's all about the relationship, mommy and baby, or caregiver and baby now, not necessarily mom so much as the primary caregiver anymore, right? Too. That's the whole other thing with infant mental health, is all that's changing our roles and stuff. And it's about the relationship. And in my work with shame, there's so much shame around. When I taught parent ed for the pediatric group, people would come in and say, oh, my my mother wants to know why I'm taking a parenting class. Of course, this was in the 90s, which is a long time ago, but I still think there's a lot of shame around. We ought to know what we're doing, right?
Right,
As a parent,
right,
we're supposed to know, as
right.
if, we have to
Where's the
always,
book?
yeah, we have to take a class to, get a license to have a dog or whatever. Why don't we have to learn how to parent and understand that we know so much more about child development than we did before? So there's no shame in infant mental health in terms of, the relationship and parents learning what children need to feel safe. I love that. It's really about that safety. What does that
Right.
mean? I mean, there's probably people out there listening going, what does that mean? So that's why we're going to have you on a lot, because we have a lot we can cover
It
around
means a lot.
what that actually means. Right. Like,
And a lot of it is what caregivers are already doing. Parents
Yeah.
just have this. If they haven't been um, railroaded by books telling them a specific way to do things as a parent, and if they are still in contact with their inner self, their inner emotions, their gut instinct
Hmm.
about what the baby needs at any given moment and what they should try doing,
Hmm.
then that can be quite sabotaging to a parent-child relationship. So helping
Yeah.
parents really stay in touch with what they truly believe their baby needs. They do know what their baby needs.
Right. Right. So when a woman's pregnant with her first baby, what thoughts and emotions do you think she has about becoming a mother? Or have you experienced her having
That's a
becoming?
big question. You know, particularly first-time mothers, but even after that, because no two pregnancies are the same, right? And so no two emotional sets are the same typically for
Mhm.
expectant mothers. Expectant mothers, I'll talk about first-time moms having their first babies. It's such a special time, but it can also kind of throw them for a loop of unexpected of what they don't expect to happen.
Mhm.
So they may not expect that uh the just the physical changes. They may have some feelings about that, and they may be receiving messages from others about being pregnant. Of course, they receive lots of stories about um, birth and that whole process and what it was like for everyone else. And it may not be anything like that for them. But to really talk about what it is truly like for them can be difficult because people have framed this period of time with happiness and joy
Yeah.
and um, enlightenment, and like you're just some other type of a being than a normal human.
Right, right. We idealize mothers. The
Very
idealization
much
and
so.
suppression of mothers, really. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's such a wonderful thing. And there's all kinds of emotions. I remember when you were talking, it reminded me of when my oldest daughter is now 40. Oh my gosh, is she going to be 44 this year? Good Lord, how does that happen? I was working in Savannah, Georgia for a large shipping company. So there was a lot of staff, and we'd have lunch in this large cafeteria setting. And all the women would tell me all their delivery stories. I would just hear all these stories about
Exactly what
childbirth.
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
People
When
in
you were talking.
Walmart or Target will just walk up to a pregnant woman and start talking about, their birth story. And
Yeah.
it's
It was
not always that
terrifying.
great.
Not
But
usually.
what they don't talk about is what happens when you bring that baby home from the hospital. In the hospital, you feel a little sense of security because there are people around you who are supporting you and helping you. And then you're kind of like dropped off at home on the front porch and then see ya.
Right, exactly, exactly. And what we know about trauma now is birth is a trauma for both the mother and the
Yes,
baby, right? And
yes,
we
it
know
is.
about trauma and how it affects the nervous system, but we idealize it, so we don't talk about it as trauma.
Right.
So again, this is
Well,
where
and
we need.
then, add in depression or sadness or
Mhm,
anxiety or
mhm,
OCD or anything like that. Add those components in. And if there's prior history of those and those kind of revisit the new mom, that can also put her down a pathway that isn't
mhm.
necessarily joyful.
Right. And the one thing I speak to too in my practice with moms is, and this is something that really is a taboo, hush, hush, we don't want to say this. There's a grief in
Yes.
having your first child because you're losing the part of your life where you'll never have to be responsible for a little being anymore. This time in your life, the maidenhood, the
Mhm.
if we had it, freedom. I don't know. I had my first child when I was really young, so I didn't really have a whole lot of years of freedom. But a lot of women, having a child in their 30s and 40s,
Mhm.
they're going to be grieving the loss of not having to get the car seat out and the diaper bag and you know, they'll
Well, that
never
can
have that
present
time again.
right, that can present a whole new set of problems. A mom who has waited to have their first baby and are in the professional world or have a a career or a job of some sort, and they have their routine down, right?
Mhm.
And then along comes pregnancy that's so unpredictable, and or it can be, and having a baby that really, I talk about with parents about how everybody was sitting on the carpet in the middle of the room, and all of a sudden somebody just came and flipped that carpet up, and everybody went up to the into the air. And it's going to take some time to kind of settle back down
Mm.
into what the new normal is, the new routine is, uh,
Yeah.
from pregnancy on
Yeah.
through this
Yeah,
first
I
year.
love that. And the demographics of the mostly moms, some dads would come to my parenting classes with the pediatric group, but the demographics were 30 something professional women who had careers just like you were saying, and they had 2 year olds, most of them, and they felt so out of control because, maybe one of our next
Sure.
segments will be on a 2 year old, and how a 2 year old is all about,
So
individuating in the,
unpredictable.
yeah. So I think there's so much again in infant mental health that we need to learn, and so much that we can talk about. But is there something, I know you said a lot already, but something you'd like to tell mothers and fathers to be about becoming a parent?
Be authentic.
Yeah.
Be your authentic self.
And what does
If
that
you
mean?
if you are well, I'll tell you. If you are feeling an emotion, it doesn't matter what that emotion is, you have a right to have that emotion.
Mm,
And my friend Dr. Ashley says all feelings are okay. Maybe all behaviors, but all feelings are okay. Please remember that. All feelings are okay. When you are pregnant and your life is turned upside down, and I don't mean to put a negative spin on any of this. I
yeah,
really want to project that
right.
it's changing, it's ever changing. And just as you get used to one thing, a new thing pops up, or a new way pops up, or
Mhm.
a new feeling pops up. You have permission to roll with those and to admit those. And you can thank people for sharing their information with you about their process, but that doesn't need to be your process.
Mm.
And whatever your process is okay.
Yeah, that I love all feelings are okay, but all behavior is. And I actually learned that from my mentor's daughter in my early childhood program. And it's a line I say all the time. It's funny you remembered that, because it's
Oh, I
true.
say all the time too. Mhm.
And again, so much has changed in terms of what we know about child development, which is why this work is so important. Because if you look at the old parenting practices, the punitive practices of break the will of the child before they're old enough to remember, beat the devil out of them, literally parents were taught that. And so we have parents that are trying to do it different, but they have in their ancestral DNA trauma around these old practices. And so what I found is in my parenting classes is parents would say the more books I read, the worse I feel, because
Yep.
we're trying to again be that authentic self. What does that mean? But and that's why I said, what does that mean? Because moms are, and that's why I went when my children were really little and studied with Catherine Kersey at Old Dominion University in Virginia, because my mother-in-law, people were telling me, giving me all kinds of ideas and opinions, and I wanted to know, like, what is it I need to do? So I went to the best of the best and I studied with her, and I still messed up my kids. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't. They're great people. But, it's like we're learning as we go. And I think that's the point. And I always say we're writing a new story that's never been written before, which makes this so hard and which makes your work so valuable, because you're there to support moms and families. I don't want to just say moms and I have to catch myself because
Hmm. All caregivers, because we have grandparents raising grandchildren now, and many foster families, temporary or long-term foster and adoptive families. I am one of those. And so families come to us in a variety of ways now, and same-sex couples, families, and it's just amazing. Dr. T. Barry Brazelton, our mentor, and he's the one you mentioned, has passed. He talked about how he traveled the world to study mothers. His work was mothers, because of his generation, I believe. But we know more about fathering now. But his work was around mothers and babies, and he concluded that No matter where he was in the world,
Mm.
mothers and babies looked exactly the same.
Oh, I love that.
Exactly the same. He found cultural differences in parenting practices,
Mhm,
but the way that the relationship worked, the synchrony, the cues babies gave to their mothers,
mm,
they all look the same around the world.
mhm. Yeah.
So if you feel alone, you're not.
Mhm.
You're right in there with that
Yeah.
sect of mommies around the world.
Oh,
So you have
I
a pretty
love
big
that.
village. Yeah.
What an amazing man. And I know you got to spend a lot of time with them. And I met him once
Mhm.
in Boston and years ago, and he just took me into his little basement office and just was such a lovely man. Anyway, again, we have so much to talk about because in there you just kind of touched on attachment, which is all about the safety, which is all about all of these pieces. So I'm looking forward to having you back on the show so we can dive into so much more. And I think today we just got a really good understanding of what is infant mental health and why that work is so important. So I
Right.
really appreciate all your insight. I'm yeah, so glad that you could be my first guest on this inner space journey. And I'm going to ask everybody on this journey with me a couple questions about inner space because it's a term that I came up with when, I'm hearing on the news about all the outer space exploration, and so much that's been put into exploring, other worlds and galaxies. And because my work has so much been about how we as human beings feel and operate in the world and what makes us kinder and gentler to one another and what makes us feel that all the feelings that we feel. I thought, well, that's really our inner space. And that's kind of almost more dark and mysterious than outer space. So the Inner Space Project is all about that. And I want to know from my guest what that means to you when I say inner space, as a place that contains the full spectrum of emotions, joy and love, sadness and fear. What comes up for you when you think about the idea of going to inner space?
Well, I think that it can be a place for people that is something that's been kind of um, pushed down,
Mm-hmm.
and we have not been encouraged to think about how we manage our emotions or even to have emotions. And we've been given messages that our emotions are, they're not good emotions.
Yeah.
It's, what do emotions have to do with anything anyway? Who cares?
Right.
Just do what you're supposed to do. It doesn't matter what you feel. And I think that we are challenged to really acknowledge our emotions and then to even speak about them.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't always well received by the listener.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
and then so you're kind of answering my next question, which is what does emotional literacy and agency mean to you? That's kind of what you're talking
leading
about,
to
right?
that, yeah, I was going there.
Is
Right.
there more you want to
So,
say about that? Like,
well, the emotional agency is what do you do with your emotions
yeah,
and how competent are you? How how well versed is your emotional intelligence so that you are able to not only acknowledge those emotions and be okay with those emotions, even sadness or grief or anger, or not all moms feel joyous, they feel kind of angry. They
mm,
can feel angry from time to time at their baby even though they love their baby so much, and they're really
yeah,
not angry at the baby, but it can land there because they're angry at the situation. They may be angry with themselves. It's okay to acknowledge those emotions,
yeah,
and your emotional agency will help guide you in what to do with those emotions.
mhm,
And so when you're competent with your emotional agency, you can self reflect and think about. I mean, all parents do this. I know I'm a parent. You can think about conversations you have around your children or interactions you had with your baby or your toddler. And later you go, "Ugh, I really wish I would have handled that differently. And what if I would have just done this?" That's your self reflection. Please do that. It's
mhm,
okay, because that's your self awareness of where your challenges are with situations and with your own emotions. And you may not always get it right, but
mhm.
guess what? You got it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
When
And a
you
lot
did
of the
that work, you got it right.
when my experience is a lot of the shame comes up in that. It's like because they
Yes.
can't go back and fix it. And instead the reframe, like you said, is it's a reflection. And so how we learn. And that's what I always say too, is a story that's never been written before. Parenting is we talk about just the world we live in today with the technology and all the media and all of the things that were kids, little babies on iPhones and screens, this is really different from, when I was a parent. There wasn't the internet, you
Mhm.
know, you didn't
Right.
have all of this. So the whole idea that we're living in a world that's different from a parenting world ever before, so that moms can and dads, any caregivers can lighten up on themselves,
Mhm.
and use that self-reflection to go, oh, wow, I'm learning without the shame. So there's no
Right.
shame in thinking, oh, well, now I know that. And maybe I would have done it different, or what have I learned from that? So it's
And I will
tricky. It's a
share,
tricky arena to navigate.
yes, it is. And I will share that when parents talk to me or caregivers talk to me about this very topic, I let them do the talking. And when I hear people address a caregiver with, well, what you should do is this, and what you could do is that, or what you should have done was that, or no, you blew that. You really, I did this with my kids, and this is what worked.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you that not only your friend, your sister, your mother will say those things, your medical provider will say those things, that this is what I did with my children.
Mm-hmm.
And I challenge when I hear that, and I say, you know, that's not your child.
Mm-hmm.
And that child's not in your home, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not in your relationship.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad you said that, because that reminds me, I did my doctoral dissertation on women who don't feel good enough as moms, which spun out from my work in pediatrics. That job came from my thesis and my master's program in early childhood about parent education in pediatrics, which again is why you and I connected so well, because I interviewed docs and parents around that subject. And again, this was the 90s. Things have changed a lot, but honestly, you know, we got a long way to go. But that I asked doctors that, I would say, what do you, how familiar are you with child development? And most of them said, not at all. We didn't get any of it in our residency. We read parenting magazines, parents magazines. That's where we get our information. We don't know. And I do think that more docs are doing more of the behavioral developmental pediatrics, but what you do with Healthy Steps and integrating mental health into pediatrics is uh, it's such an important element. I know there's a bigger word, like having a hard time pulling it up, but to just describe the importance of that, because again, that was my experience. I went to my pediatrician, I went to my mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law were wanting me to bottle feed, but I wanted to breastfeed. And I went to my pediatrician and he didn't have a whole lot, and I'm like, wow, I got this little baby and I don't know what to do with it. I'm only 21 years old. Somebody give me the real goods. And so
Yeah.
that's why I met Catherine Kersey and worked so much with her in I did a mother's center program to support moms. And I just felt like, again, we have to learn this new paradigm. It's really a paradigm shift, from the old school into what do kids need? What do we need? How do we integrate it all? So yeah,
Right.
and having that literacy and agency is key. And again, you talk about anger, that's a big one, right? That people
Mhm.
are afraid of, because again, all feelings are okay, but all behavior isn't. And people think anger is, punching somebody in the nose or something, when it isn't. Anger is an important feeling to pay attention to. And a big one that comes up for me, and again, we're going to have you back on the show to talk about all this even more, but is resentment.
Mhm.
I had a
Yes.
mom in a session yesterday who's pregnant with her second child, has a 2-year-old at home, and her husband's going to be in Europe for work and decided to take some time off and go to Morocco, even though she had said it was okay for him to do that. She was like, I'm feeling like I don't know how I feel about this. And I said, well, it might be resentment, And
Yeah,
Brene Brown, talk in her work talks about resentment is usually this feeling like where my needs aren't getting met. And so as for
right.
a mom, how can we pay attention to our own needs? And again, all feelings are okay, but all behavior isn't. And what do we do with that? And so I'm so excited that you get to, share with us all of these insights on how to do that with the little ones. Just a couple more questions and then we're going to wrap up today. How do you think raising mental health awareness impacts individuals and communities? I know you probably spoke a little bit to that already, but
I think, you know, because we're a society that has a really difficult time still today with people having uh, mental health concerns or challenges, that events have happened in our country that have sort of forced us to think about mental health.
mm,
And, we have to be drug along to to change our mindset.
mm,
Uh, but I do think that the more people hear about the importance of mental health and that we normalize that, as, if someone, heaven forbid, had cancer, we would all rally around them and we would shower them with resources and love and support. But when someone has a mental health challenge, we don't necessarily do that. We can feel our own guilt and shame. Parents can, with their kids, think, this
right.
is something that I did wrong and I messed this up. Not, not true.
Yeah.
Not true. Not always the case. And so when we think about infant mental health, I think the prevention piece of that should be very attractive to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
supporting our parents so that they have their own support system in a preventive way
Mm-hmm.
is where we can start.
Yeah.
So if you are a grandma to be, if you are an auntie or a neighbor or a friend, you can do small things to change and go that direction,
Mm-hmm.
to give that surrounding support to the family to be. Um, by stopping the shaming and guilting and expectation and listening.
Mm-hmm.
Stop. Just stop. Stop. Don't listen to respond. Listen to hear
Right.
and be accepting of what you hear and supportive and say, I'm here for you. We'll talk
I
more about what to do when the baby comes.
I love that you said the word prevention because I think the Inner Space Project to me is somewhat of a prevention, if we want to use that word. It's what I want to do is break down the stigma of what mental health is or truly means, because we think of mental illness when we say the word mental health, we think that person's mentally ill and that's a bad thing and that's, oh my gosh, instead of what's our mental health, what's our wellness, what do we need to know about our mental health and our emotional literacy and agency to prevent us from spiraling into a more severe mental health crisis. um, and I've seen that in my work so much. It's just demystifying the ideas that we have about what it means. Anger's bad, happy is good. And instead of how do we integrate all the parts, like we're talking about moms, feeling, these feelings, but also feeling the joy. I mean, it's such a paradox. It's all a paradox of both, and two paradoxes defined as two seeming opposites that exist together. And so I love that you said prevention, because I think that is key, is being able to have these conversations and talk about things and just normalize, in a sense, that we all have feelings, negative and positive, that may seem dark and scary, but if we explore it, it's and shine some light in it, it's not so scary.
And rarely is judgment on someone's feelings or their situation
Mm,
helpful. Rarely.
mm.
So let's just stop judging people.
Yeah, like Ted Lasso says, be curious, not judgmental. I love that. So be curious.
And that's so true.
Yeah,
That's so true. So there are questions you can ask.
yeah,
You can ask, what was most challenging for you? What did you
yeah,
find to be most challenging? That's an open-ended question that says, I'm ready to hear the answer.
yeah.
And then What was most rewarding?
Yeah.
Because there are both of those things found in a birth story.
Right. It's both in. It's like two
Mhm.
sides of the same coin. They all go together. And once we learn that, instead of trying so hard to make all the hard stuff go away, we
Or fix it.
learn that's that wholehearted
Yeah.
experience of living all of who we are. So,
I know as a mother, I want to fix everything. I'm learning not to do that.
oh, I know I'm still
That's
not good at it either. Just that listening. Oh, it's really sounds
right.
really hard. Instead, well, how about why don't you try?
We all fall into all
We
those
want to do
things
that.
that we were told, right? And
Yeah.
we are trained and conditioned to respond in that way as a mother. So it is challenging to change that,
Yeah.
but we can do it.
Yeah,
We
we
can
can.
do it. Just little baby steps.
Yeah.
And then acknowledge, self-reflect and acknowledge the progress you made
Yeah.
in changing that.
That's so important to just say,
Mhm.
even though it feels like we don't have it all figured out, the little baby steps that no pun intended, baby steps that we take along the way, are really big. They're huge. Okay. One thing before we go, and again, we'll have you back on many, many times, but just one tool tip, one last little takeaway for our listeners about the early years of parenting.
Give yourselves a break. Give each other support. Acknowledge what you believe that you did that was positive and reward yourself for that. Tell yourself, good job.
Yeah.
Build on your own strengths.
Good. Good. I love that. Thank you, DeAnn. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for being with us today. And yeah, and we'll definitely have you back on the show. And is there anything else before we go that you want to say before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think, parents do a good job. They do the best they can.
Do the best we can, right? We do.
Best they can.
We do.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you. Until the next time. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this inner space journey and we'll come back again for the upcoming episodes. For more information about the Inner Space Project and all the other offerings I have for you, please visit my website, www.pattiashley.com, PATTIASHLEY. Thanks again, and I'll see you real soon.